Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick unboxing and first look at the Google Pixel Fold. Now this retails for $1,799 US. This is the Obsidian black color, and I'm really excited to share it with all of you because this is the first legitimate, or I really should just say competing product with the Samsung Z Fold lineup, which I've had every generation of. And let's just be clear, foldables are amazing. If you've had the pleasure of using one, you already know that. They're far from perfect, but 4 years ago, I would have told you they are the future of handhelds. And now, with Google finally making their own product, it seems pretty obvious that that has become a fact. Now, when it comes to hardware, Google certainly has charged us a incredibly premium price, in fact, right in line with the same price structure as Samsung. The key difference is that Google is not really throwing the kitchen sink of phenomenal hardware into the device, and I'll go over specifications in a moment. They're really more focused on cosmetic, aesthetic, and the experience. And that makes sense, after all, because Google doesn't really make hardware, of course, in the same way that Samsung does, right? I mean, the majority of the world relies on Samsung for hardware in one way or another. So paperwork out of the way, we have our charging cable and adapter. Let's get to the device itself. Now, at $17.99, I really would have hoped, and there, maybe more to show here, but I know everyone's interested in the phone. There may have been a hope that Google would go out of their way to give us something that isn't just about, being basically the best looking foldable device ever made. And I think that is what they've accomplished. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, granted, this is the first time I will have it in hand. I've seen it in store, and I'm trying to open this as cleanly as I can. Just go ahead and pop it open, get that off of here. 10 ounces, and we have a bezel. We don't have an under-display camera. We have higher megapixel ratings, but also a lot of this hardware is very similar to what is found, or yet identical, in budget phones like the 7A from Google. And that does leave a lot to be desired. But the average consumer isn't going to care about that. They're going to care about this front display. 5.8 inches. It is a 17.4 by 9 aspect ratio. 2092 by 1080, of course, in OLED. That's 408 ppi, pretty good for a Full HD Plus panel. You can see, unlike the Fold from Samsung, we do not have a gap when the phone is closed. At least, it appears to be flush when compared with the Z Fold line. That's a big deal, so fairly thin when closed. Matte finish, soft touch on the back here. And again, this is the Obsidian black. You can go with the porcelain, which is more of a cream or off-white color. Fingerprint scanner, power button, your camera array here on the back. I'll get to that in a moment. The interior display, 7.6 inches. But again, we are dealing with and I'm sorry for the reflection there, we are dealing with a different aspect ratio, again, than what you've seen with the Z Fold. So this particular interior panel, again, 7.6 inches, a 6:5 aspect ratio, 2208 by 1840 res. That's 380 ppi. The good news about both of these displays, at least on paper, is that they are incredibly bright. 1450 peak for the internal, and the external 1550, which makes sense because, this needs to be able to operate in bright sunlight. Let's go ahead. The power button is the fingerprint scanner. To be clear, let me go ahead and power that up. And this really is one of the defining parts of this phone, is that I think if you're going to entertain the Pixel Fold, it's going to be because of that front display that you're seeing now. Because the key argument for this device versus the Z Fold, and of course I will be comparing them as a generational Fold user, as I will say, since I've had all 4 gens, is that front display, because that really is the defining characteristic in usability. unlike, of course, the Fold line, which has a very narrow aspect ratio display on the front, which many people feel just leads to wanting to use that interior display, and I get it. Now, for me, that isn't the reason I want to use the interior display. It's because I bought a foldable to use the interior display. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't like a wider display on the Z Fold line, and in fact, that's exactly what Samsung addressed in the previous generation, the one I'm on now, the Fold 4. They did make it a little bit wider, and if you used that phone, you are very much aware of the huge difference that slightly wider aspect ratio made from the 3 to the 4. Here, of course, that's all moot, and that is because Google said, hey, how are we going to differentiate ourselves? We're going to make a phone that is still a legitimate phone when closed. And I think just looking at it, feeling it, it's really nice. They've done that. But when it comes to the hardware, I feel like you're really betting on Google as well, the mothership of Android, if you will. And they are. And so that is from, a foldable success standpoint, critical. Samsung has kind of carried the onus, not kind of, being the only major manufacturer in the U.S. to make a foldable that we can purchase and actually enjoy, and that actually is worth buying, unlike a lot of the China phones that have come out that aren't for sale here for a wide array of reasons, really one particular one. And, basically now that we have a competing product, that already is huge. But in addition to that, because this is the company that, of course, is responsible for Android software, for the OS itself, that means we should get even better optimization for that interior screen over time. That at least is my hope. But when it comes to build quality, at least based on what I've seen so far, this phone does not hold a candle to the Z Fold, and that isn't a good thing. That's something I'll save for another video. But when it comes to the processor and RAM, the Tensor G2 isn't a bad processor, but it is a bad processor for an $1,800 device. And that's something I'll really focus on in another video, not today. I think it's great that we have 12 gigs of RAM. Google certainly knew that if they were to, deliver a paltry serving of RAM, the phone would pretty much be a mess right out of the box. And cameras, just like software, are where Google, outside of the cosmetic, again, look and feel of this device, they're really relying on that to be the differentiating factor over the Z Fold. Because when it comes to battery life, this is likely going to be inferior. And no pen support, like at least natively, no stylus like the Z Fold 3 or 4. But the cameras, so let's get into that right now. We have the front-facing camera is a 9.5 megapixel shooter. One of the things that's nice is that all of these cameras are capable of recording 4K video, and I think that is a big deal for this device. It certainly appears to lend itself to a more modern premium device and give it a little bit more of an identity. But, that I don't know how much I'll be bragging about specifications beyond that. The internal camera that you have there is an 8 megapixel camera, again, capable of 4K 30 or 60 to my knowledge, so that's really nice. And then when we go to the actual back of the device, that's where the so-called magic happens with regard to the cameras, right? Because now you're looking at like a wide array of capability. We have 10 times optical zoom. I mean, it's just, there are a lot of specifications when it comes to that, but I think the star of the show is still really what Google can do with computational photography. So that is what I think most people are going to be interested in. We'll see how well it actually does. I mean, yes, we've got a very high megapixel rating on the set of cameras back there. How much that's going to actually mean to performance is a different story, because even though we have a 48 megapixel rating, many of you know that doesn't mean a hell of a lot. So until I start taking pictures with this, I do not want to get hung up on that 48 megapixel camera. Again, it's nice on paper, but it's also not a large sensor. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. So again, to have this form factor, I think, is a very big move. The battery being under 5,000 milliamp hours is not incredibly enticing. But, you know, just to give you a quick look, I have my Fold 4 here, just so you can see, again, that front screen side by side for perspective, because I think it is fairly important. And I've removed the case on this guy so that you get a proper look. I mean, as this thing is not changing orientation as it should, I'm talking about the Pixel Fold, you can see that difference. I mean, it's stark, you know, and that is the aspect ratio. Wider and shorter, longer and more narrow. And I would say it's a matter of personal preference, but it's really not. I mean, from a human usability standpoint, there's no question that that front screen is going to better serve just about every person that picks it up. But when we get into multitasking, when we get into battery life and durability, I think that's where the Pixel Fold is going to suffer in many ways. But you've got to remember, this is the first foldable they're making, and I think from that standpoint, if you take that into account, this appears to be, again, a lovely device. Cosmetically speaking, many people are going to prefer it over the Z Fold line. So really, if all that we end up, you know, if the worst part of this device ends up being software optimization and the hardware being underwhelming, that is a really, really good start for a first-generation foldable. But that doesn't mean I'm going to recommend this to anyone. So that's a double-edged sword, because if no one buys this, Google isn't going to have a very good reason to come out with a second generation. So you see where I'm going with this. It may be a love-hate existence, but already I think the hardware is really nice. Both displays appear to be really good. I expect the cameras to be, you know, well, I know what to expect because they're already in other phones, kind of like the Tensor G2 processor. I mean, the fact that that lives in a phone that sells for $499, that's part of the thing that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way at an $1,800 price point. But it's clear Google wants us to take that risk with them with this price point for their first foldable phone. You know, keep your eyes peeled. I'll be unboxing also a case for this, the actual Pixel Fold case. I'm not going with third party. I may also share some screen protectors with all of you, and I'm just going to test it out. I'm going to use it as my daily driver, see how it goes for a couple weeks, and then get back to all of you. I may give you some updates in between, but again, I'm not expecting this to outperform my nearly one-year-old Fold at all. It's only going to be about really the experience of having a different aspect ratio and, of course, a different cosmetic look and feel. And this is going to take some time to get used to for me because it is so much wider. It's also going to take a different toll on my pockets, but it's a lot thinner. 10 ounces and change. It's not very heavy. So I like what I'm seeing. And again, for a first unit, this is an amazing phone. And had Samsung's first foldable looked and felt like this, it would have been a home run on day one. So Google did a lot of things right here. I am going to say, though, had they made this phone somewhere between $1,000 and $1,300, I think this would have been such an easy sell. And that's, again, assuming everything is going to work as it should. But the durability factor does worry me a lot. Because durability with foldables is one of the biggest questions, especially for people who have not owned a single one of them. That's usually their biggest concern is, will they break the phone or will the phone die on its own? And I'll get into that as I continue coverage with this, because durability is something I personally have had issues with the Fold 3. And I have started experiencing some issues with the Fold 4. So a little nugget here for future videos. And we'll see. But the lack of durability that you've read about with this device out of the gate, I was really hoping Google would get that part right, if that would be the only thing they would get right. But when you're literally 5 years behind the competition, it shows. So beautiful design, really like the phone. It's a really nice piece of hardware. I just have to hope that it does well enough that we see a second generation, because this is putting a lot of potential on the table, and hopefully Google does not quit. They don't have a great track record with hardware. They do tend to give up. That's why you don't see a lot of Pixel devices on my channel. It's not that I don't like Google. I do. They do make the world go round. Not sure what they were thinking with this bezel, but that's also not the end of the world. But that is a stark contrast between Samsung's devices and this one. But I know I said this would be quick. I tend to do that. It's a really nice phone, really expensive. It's just, not a dream device from a hardware perspective. Also, when it comes to multitasking on that interior display, it is limited to 2 applications. Now, for some of you, that won't be an issue. But of course, the beauty of having a tablet in your pocket is usually multitasking, and doing 2 things at once sounds very much like a candy bar experience, not a foldable experience. So we'll see. I'm sure that is something that will change over time, but it doesn't help that we have that Tensor G2 in here. I've also heard that the phone gets really hot just about all the time. So I don't want to start subscribing to any of that stuff until I experience it myself. But we'll see. Again, just one last quick look around this device since I didn't even really do that. Type-C port for charging, your SIM card slot right there, speakers, microphone array, the actual spine or hinge, whatever you'd like to call it, along the top of the phone, more speakers and presumably a mic, fingerprint scanner, power button, volume rocker, our front-facing cameras I mentioned earlier. We open the device. The other front-facing, so that's 2 in total, and then on the back we have 3 more. So wide-angle, telephoto, and that 35 equivalent, conceptually. But that's pretty much it. I am excited about the 10 times optical zoom on this and the camera experience in general, but I'm not expecting it to in any way, shape, or form pull me away from my Z Fold 4. At the end of the day, the thing that really would do that, again, is this form factor and whether or not you really think it's vastly superior. And that's really what it's all about. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them, hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe and please stay safe. Later.